It was the summer of 2023, and the air was thick with the excitement of new beginnings. After 5 years of marriage, John and Sarah Miller had finally saved enough to renovate their charming, old suburban home. The Millers were what most would call the picture-perfect family. John, a hard-working accountant, spent his days buried in spreadsheets and client calls, while Sarah, a stay-at-home mom, looked after their 2-year-old daughter, Lily. Their house was in desperate need of an upgrade, and this renovation was supposed to be the start of a fresh chapter in their lives. John, ever the practical one, insisted on hiring the best local contractors to realize their dream house. Sarah, who loved interior design, eagerly took on the role of overseeing the project while John was at work. They chose Mike's Renovations, a company with excellent reviews, and soon enough, the workers were in and out of the house, tearing down walls, painting, and installing new fixtures. First, it was all normal. John would leave for work at 7 a.m. and return around 6 p.m. By then, Sarah would update him on the progress, showing him the latest choices for tile or flooring, always with a smile on her face. But as the weeks went on, John started to notice subtle changes in his wife. Her smile seemed different. She was more distant, distracted even, as though her mind was elsewhere. John chalked it up to the stress of renovations. After all, remodeling an entire house wasn't easy, especially with a toddler to look after. But still, something felt off. He brushed it aside, not wanting to appear paranoid. He trusted Sarah completely. Their life together had always been filled with love, laughter, and compromise. Sure, there had been ups and downs, there always are in any marriage, but this was supposed to be the good part. The dream house was supposed to bring them closer, but John couldn't shake the nagging feeling that something wasn't quite right. And so, life continued as usual, or at least it seemed to. The project was progressing smoothly, and soon, the Millers were spending more time discussing their home than anything else. But there was one part of the renovation that Sarah seemed to enjoy just a little too much. His name was Rick, the head of Mike's Renovations crew. A tall, muscular man in his late 30s, with a rugged look that Sarah once joked was straight out of a romance novel. At first, John didn't think anything of it. Rick was just doing his job, overseeing the workers and making sure everything was running on schedule. But then Sarah started mentioning him more frequently, casually slipping his name into conversations. "He's really good at what he does," she would say. "He's so meticulous. I feel like he really cares about the details." John nodded along, never suspecting a thing. He trusted his wife. Why wouldn't he? But every time she mentioned Rick, John couldn't help but feel a slight discomfort creeping into his gut. It wasn't jealousy exactly. It was more like a faint alarm bell ringing in the back of his mind, though he chose to ignore it. After all, they were just talking about home improvements, or so he thought. Weeks passed, and John began noticing subtle changes in Sarah's routine. She had always been attentive to Lily, doting over their daughter with the patience of a saint. But lately, Sarah seemed more distracted. She spent more time fussing over the house, chatting with the contractors, and less time playing with Lily or planning their family dinners. One afternoon, John came home earlier than usual. It had been a particularly slow day at the office, and he decided to surprise Sarah with takeout from her favorite Italian place. As he pulled into the driveway, he saw Rick's truck parked outside. That was strange. The contractors usually left by 4 p.m., but it was almost 6. He walked through the front door, expecting to see Sarah with Lily, but the house was eerily quiet. No toys scattered across the living room floor. No cartoons playing in the background. Just silence. John's stomach tightened. He called out Sarah's name, but there was no answer. He took a few steps towards the kitchen, and that's when he heard it, soft laughter. Not just any laughter, Sarah's laughter. And it wasn't the casual, carefree laugh he was used to hearing. It was different, flirtatious, almost as if she was sharing a private joke with someone. John's heart pounded in his chest. He slowly approached the kitchen, trying to keep his breathing steady. The laughter stopped abruptly, and he could hear hushed voices now. Standing just outside the kitchen door, John listened, trying to make sense of what he was hearing. He knew eavesdropping was wrong, but something deep inside him told him he needed to know what was going on. "That's really sweet of you." Sarah's voice came through the door. "I don't know what I'd do without you helping out so much." "I'm just doing my job," Rick replied, though there was an unmistakable warmth in his tone. "You're doing more than just your job?" Sarah whispered, her voice taking on a softness John hadn't heard in a while. The conversation was innocent enough, nothing damning, but it didn't sit right with John. He stood frozen for a moment, debating whether to confront them or pretend he hadn't heard anything. But the tension was gnawing at him. He couldn't shake the feeling that his world was shifting right in front of his eyes. Before he could decide what to do, the kitchen door swung open, and there stood Rick, surprise flickering in his eyes as he saw John. Sarah was behind him, her face flushed, whether from embarrassment or something else. John couldn't tell. "Oh, hey, honey," Sarah said a little too quickly, her voice higher than usual. "I didn't know you were coming home early." John tried to smile, but it felt forced. "Yeah, slow day at work. Thought I'd surprise you." Rick cleared his throat awkwardly. "I should get going. We're done for the day anyway." Without waiting for any response, he quickly gathered his things and left, leaving John and Sarah standing there, the tension between them thick enough to cut with a knife. That night, things felt different. John wanted to bring it up, to ask why Sarah seemed so flustered when he walked in, but he couldn't find the right words. Instead, they ate dinner in near silence, the only sound the soft hum of the TV playing cartoons for Lily. As they cleaned up, Sarah kept glancing at him, her expression unreadable. Finally, she spoke. "You're quiet tonight," she said, her voice light, but her eyes searched his face. John shrugged, keeping his voice steady. "Just tired, I guess." She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Well, you've been working a lot. Maybe we should plan a weekend away or something, just the two of us." John nodded, but the idea of spending more time together didn't bring him the comfort it should have. Instead, his mind was occupied with the image of Sarah and Rick standing in the kitchen, laughing softly together. The next few days passed without incident, but the feeling of unease lingered. Sarah continued to spend more and more time supervising the renovations, and John found himself coming home later, trying to avoid the tension he couldn't shake. One Friday evening, after a long day at the office, John returned home to find Lily already asleep and the house eerily quiet once again. Sarah was sitting in the living room, scrolling through her phone, her expression distant. "How was your day?" John asked, forcing himself to sound casual. "Fine," she said, barely looking up. "Everything okay?" he pressed, hoping she'd give him some explanation, anything to ease his mind. Sarah looked at him, her eyes narrowing slightly. "Why do you keep asking me that? It's like you think something's wrong." John hesitated. "I don't know, Sarah. You've been different lately." "Different? I'm just tired from dealing with the house and Lily all day," she snapped, her tone suddenly defensive. "But of course you wouldn't understand, because you're never here." That hit John like a punch to the gut. "What are you talking about? I'm working to provide for us. You know that." "Yeah, and while you're working, I'm stuck here dealing with everything else," Sarah shot back, her voice rising. "I didn't sign up to be a single parent while you play the hero at the office." John's temper flared. "Single parent? That's not fair, Sarah. I'm here every night." "Barely," she interrupted, standing up and pacing the room. "And when you are here, you're checked out, too tired to even care about what's going on in this house." John felt his chest tighten. This wasn't just about the renovations or his work hours. There was something else at play, something deeper. And for the first time, he let himself acknowledge the truth that had been gnawing at him for weeks. "Is there something going on with you and Rick?" John asked, his voice low but firm. Sarah's eyes widened, but just for a split second before she composed herself. "You're seriously accusing me of that?" she said, her voice dripping with disbelief. "You're really going to play that card, John?" Sarah crossed her arms and glared at him, her lips pressed into a tight line. "I can't believe you're accusing me of something like that. Rick is just doing his job, and you're out here acting like I'm having some kind of affair." But John wasn't buying it. Not anymore. Sarah, he said quietly. I know what I heard. Sarah's face tightened. She was usually so composed, but now there was a flicker of something, guilt, fear, or maybe frustration, that John had never seen before. Her voice wavered slightly as she continued to push back. You think you heard something? Are you seriously going to accuse me of that based on a few words? Rick's been here to help with the renovations, John. That's it. Maybe if you were home more, you'd see that. John's pulse quickened. He wanted to believe her. He needed to believe her. But everything inside him screamed that something was wrong. His thoughts raced back to the little things. The change in her routine, the long, lingering smiles when she talked about Rick, the quiet tension in their conversations. Don't twist this around, Sarah, he said, struggling to keep his voice steady. I'm not stupid. There's something going on, and I need you to be honest with me. Sarah let out an exasperated sigh, shaking her head as if she were the one being wronged. You're unbelievable. You're never home. You're always working. And now you have the nerve to accuse me? Maybe if you spent more time with us, you'd understand what it's like. John took a step closer, his heart pounding in his chest. So now it's my fault? I'm working to keep a roof over our heads. And you're telling me that's the problem? The tension between them was unbearable. Sarah's gaze wavered, but she didn't back down. Instead, she doubled down on the one thing that always made John feel like he wasn't doing enough: his long hours at work. I'm here every day, John. Every day. With Lily. With this house. With these renovations. I'm exhausted, and you're not here. You just go off to your little office, and I'm stuck here trying to hold everything together. So maybe if you were around more, things would be different. John felt like he'd been slapped. It wasn't the first time she'd hinted that his job was a wedge between them. But this felt different. Felt calculated. So what, Sarah? You're saying this is all my fault? Because I'm working? To take care of us? Sarah crossed her arms again, her eyes flashing with defiance. I'm just saying maybe you should look at yourself before you start throwing accusations around. John stood there, trying to wrap his head around what was happening. His mind raced, and all the doubts and fears he had been suppressing came flooding to the surface. But he wasn't about to let her off the hook so easily. I don't buy it, he said firmly. You've been distant for weeks. You talk about Rick like he's more than just some contractor. And I come home today, and you two are laughing like you've got some inside joke. Don't act like I'm imagining things. Sarah's expression faltered, just for a split second, before she snapped back into her defensive stance. You know what, John? I'm done with this. I'm done with you making me feel like I'm doing something wrong just because I'm here and you're not. John's hands clenched into fists at his sides. This wasn't the woman he married. Something had shifted, something he hadn't noticed until now. The next day, John couldn't shake the gnawing feeling in his gut. He left for work as usual, but his mind was far from spreadsheets and client calls. All he could think about was Sarah and Rick. By lunchtime, he'd had enough. He couldn't focus on anything at the office, so he made an impulsive decision to leave early. He told his boss he wasn't feeling well and needed the afternoon off. As he drove home, his mind was racing. He didn't know what he was hoping to find or not find, but he had to know. When John pulled into the driveway, his heart sank. Rick's truck was parked outside, and the house was quiet. Too quiet. He stepped out of the car, his pulse pounding in his ears as he approached the front door. He opened it slowly, careful not to make a sound. The house was eerily still. Lily was napping, as usual, and the only sound John could hear was a faint murmur coming from the kitchen. He took a deep breath and moved toward the sound, his chest tightening with every step. And there they were, Sarah and Rick, standing way too close in the kitchen, laughing softly. Rick had his hand on her lower back, and Sarah was leaning in. Her face lit up in a way John hadn't seen in months. John's vision blurred with rage. "What the hell is going on here?" he demanded, his voice louder than he intended. They both jumped, spinning around to face him. Rick stepped back immediately, guilt flashing across his face. But Sarah just stood there, her face pale but her eyes defiant. "John, I can explain," she started. But John wasn't interested in explanations. Explain what, Sarah? John cut her off, his voice shaking with anger. Explain why you've been acting distant for weeks? Why you've been spending so much time with him? Rick, looking like he wanted to bolt, tried to speak up. Look, man, I didn't mean. Shut up, John snapped, glaring at him. Get out. Now. Rick glanced at Sarah, as if hoping for some sort of support, but she didn't say anything. Defeated, Rick grabbed his jacket from the chair and quickly made his exit, leaving John and Sarah alone in the kitchen. John turned to Sarah, his anger mixing with disbelief. I can't believe you do this to me. To Lily. Sarah crossed her arms, her face hardening. Don't act like this is all on me. You're the one who's never here, John. You're always working. And I'm just supposed to sit around and wait for you to finally care about what's going on in this house. John shook his head in disbelief. So what? You decide to make love with the contractor? While our daughter's sleeping in the next room. Sarah didn't even flinch. Instead, she shot back with a venomous tone. Don't act so surprised, John. You've been checked out for months. I've been alone in this house, handling everything while you're out playing the hero at your stupid job. Maybe if you actually cared about me, about us, this wouldn't have happened. John's mouth dropped open. Are you seriously blaming me for this? You're the one who… Yeah, because you're never here. Sarah interrupted, her voice rising. You think just because you bring home a paycheck that everything's fine? You think that's enough? Well, it's not. I needed someone, John. And Rick. He was there. Would you like me to keep going? John stood there, stunned. He couldn't believe what he was hearing. Sarah, the woman he had loved for years, was now twisting the situation, making him feel like this was all somehow his fault. The audacity of it all left him speechless for a moment. So that's it, John finally managed to say, his voice filled with disbelief. You think it's okay to betray me because I'm working to provide for this family? Sarah threw her hands up in frustration. You don't get it, John. It's not just about the money. It's about being present, about being a part of this family. You haven't been here for me, for Lily, for us. I've been doing this alone for too long. John's anger flared again. Doing what alone? Renovating the house? Taking care of Lily? That's life, Sarah. We're supposed to be partners. Not running off with the first guy who shows you attention when things get hard. Sarah's eyes flashed with anger. Don't act like you're perfect. You've been married to your job, John. You're never here. I needed more than just a paycheck. I needed you, but you were too busy to notice that I was slipping away. John felt his stomach drop. Her words were sharp, cutting through the anger and hitting a part of him he hadn't been willing to acknowledge. Maybe he had been working too much. Maybe he hadn't been as present as he should have been. But that didn't excuse what she had done. He wasn't the one who had broken their vows. So what now? John asked, his voice quieter but still filled with anger. You're blaming me for your decision to cheat? That's your excuse. Sarah crossed her arms again, her posture defensive. I'm not making excuses. I'm telling you why this happened. You're the one who left me alone in this house every day. You're the one who stopped caring. John's jaw tightened. I never stopped caring. I've been doing everything I can to make sure we have a good life. But apparently, that wasn't enough for you. Sarah's eyes flickered with something. Maybe regret, maybe frustration, but she didn't respond. Instead, she turned her back to him and started walking toward the hallway. Where are you going? John demanded. I need some space, Sarah muttered. I can't deal with this right now. John's anger boiled over. Space? You've had plenty of space, Sarah. While I've been working my ass off, you've had all the space you needed to do whatever you wanted with Rick. Sarah froze, her back still to him, but she didn't respond. John knew he had struck a nerve, but at this point he didn't care. The next morning, John woke up early. He hadn't slept much, tossing and turning as his mind replayed the argument over and over again. Sarah hadn't come to bed that night. Instead, she had stayed in the guest room, her silence echoing louder than any words could have. John made a decision. He wasn't going to let this drag on. He wasn't going to sit around and wait for Sarah to decide what she wanted. She had made her choice when she let Rick into their lives, into their home, into their marriage. John got dressed and started packing Sarah's things. He grabbed a couple of suitcases from the attic and began stuffing her clothes into them, one by one. Every shirt, every dress, every piece of jewelry reminded him of the life they once had. But that life was over now. Sarah had destroyed it. By the time Sarah came downstairs, John had already finished. The suitcases were by the door, and his face was set with determination. "What are you doing?" she asked, her voice shaky. "I'm packing your things," John replied coldly. "You're leaving." Sarah's eyes widened in shock. "You're kicking me out?" John met her gaze, his jaw clenched. "What did you expect, Sarah? That I'd just forget what happened? That we'd go back to normal? You cheated on me. You betrayed me. I'm not going to sit here and pretend like everything's fine." Sarah's face crumpled, but her voice was still defiant. "You're really going to throw me out like this? After everything we've been through?" John's heart ached, but he didn't waver. "You threw us away, Sarah. I'm just making it official." As John and Sarah stood in the hallway, the reality of their crumbling marriage sinking in, the soft sound of footsteps made them both freeze. Lily, their innocent 2-year-old daughter, appeared at the top of the stairs, rubbing her eyes sleepily. "Mommy? Daddy?" Lily's small voice broke the tension, and John's heart shattered. He had been so caught up in the anger, the betrayal, that he hadn't thought about how all of this would affect their little girl. Sarah's eyes filled with tears as she looked up at Lily. "It's okay, sweetie. Mommy's just going to go away for a little while." John felt a lump form in his throat. This wasn't how things were supposed to be. He had always pictured a happy family, raising their daughter in the home they had built together. But now that dream was gone. "We'll figure it out," John said, his voice barely a whisper. He didn't know what the future held, but he knew one thing. He would do whatever it took to protect Lily from the fallout of their broken marriage. Over the next few days, John leaned heavily on his best friend, Dave, who had been there for him through thick and thin. When John called to tell him what had happened, Dave didn't hesitate. He came over immediately, helping John with Lily and offering support through the painful process of separating from Sarah. "You're doing the right thing," Dave said as they sat on the porch one evening. "She betrayed your trust, man. There's no coming back from that." John nodded, though his heart still felt heavy. He knew Dave was right, but that didn't make it any easier. A month later, Sarah was gone. She had moved in with her sister, leaving John and Lily alone in the house that was supposed to be their family home. The renovations were finished, but the house felt empty, hollow. John stood in the kitchen one morning, staring out the window as Lily played in the yard. He had been through hell, but he knew he would get through it. He had to, for Lily's sake. Life would never be the same, but maybe, just maybe, that wasn't such a bad thing. As he took a deep breath, John realized that, for the first time in weeks, he felt something close to peace. He wasn't sure what the future held, but one thing was certain. He and Lily would face it together.